How 20th century tycoons built massive wealth from scratch. When we think of the world's richest business leaders, names like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, and Bill Gates usually come to mind. But the real trailblazers of huge wealth were the giants of the 20th century, who started with very little and built huge businesses that still impact industries and economies today. These people weren't just businessmen, they were forward thinkers who changed entire industries. In this video, we'll explore how these amazing men went from having nothing to becoming some of the richest people ever, and how their bold choices helped shape the modern business world. From oil companies to steel factories and car assembly lines, their stories show that with hard work, new ideas, and determination, anything is possible. Get ready to learn how these giants turned their dreams into massive businesses. John D. Rockefeller. The title of the wealthiest businessman in history actually belongs to someone who lived almost 100 years ago, John D. Rockefeller. Let's explore how he, along with other tycoons of the time, built fortunes so massive that even today's tech giants haven't matched them. This is the story of Standard Oil and how one man's vision created a business empire that defined an era. In 1839, John Rockefeller was born in upstate New York to a modest family. His father was a traveling merchant who sold herbal medicines that were often more gimmick than cure. This unconventional household taught young John to hustle and save every penny he could. Growing up, he helped his mother with odd jobs like raising turkeys and working for neighbors to bring extra money. When the family settled in Cleveland, Ohio, John's intelligence and drive helped him land a bookkeeping job. His first job paid only 50 cents a day, so he picked up extra work for other companies on the side. When his boss refused to give him a meaningful raise, John decided to go out on his own and started a small business trading produce. He borrowed $4,000, a huge amount at the time, and recorded $500,000 in sales during his first year. He was just 18. In 1859, oil was discovered in Pennsylvania, sparking the first American oil rush. Although drilling for oil was risky, Rockefeller saw potential in refining oil into kerosene used in lamps before electricity became widespread. But there was a problem. Pennsylvania's oil fields were too far from his home base in Cleveland. So Rockefeller waited until a rail line was built, connecting Cleveland to the oil fields. Once it was ready, he wasted no time and went all in. With the help of skilled chemists and engineers, Rockefeller improved the oil refining process, even finding ways to sell byproducts like tar and wax. His refinery quickly became one of the largest in Cleveland. But Rockefeller wanted more. Over the next few years, he bought out nearly all the other refineries in the area, convincing competitors to sell by showing them that he could operate at a loss longer than they could survive. By 1870, he officially created Standard Oil. Rockefeller's strategies often involved cutting costs aggressively, which allowed him to lower oil prices and outlast competitors. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's oil refining. He was so influential that he could negotiate directly with rail companies, securing special deals for transporting his oil. However, his power and influence began to make people nervous. Other industries worried he could monopolize more than just oil, and politicians started calling for regulation. To stay ahead, Rockefeller restructured his business, creating the Standard Oil Trust, which allowed him to control dozens of companies under one organization. He built a massive headquarters in New York City to show the world just how successful Standard Oil had become. But despite all his efforts, his monopoly was under threat. By the early 1900s, new oil fields were discovered in Russia and Asia, and foreign companies were competing for American customers. At the same time, the U.S. government passed the Sherman Antitrust Act to crack down on monopolies. Although Standard Oil's complex structure delayed the government's actions in 1911, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil was a monopoly and ordered it to be broken up into 34 separate companies. Ironically, this breakup only made Rockefeller wealthier, as many of those companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron went on to become industry giants themselves. Even today, John D. Rockefeller's adjusted net worth is estimated at around $400 billion, a number that remains unmatched. His story highlights how these early 20th century tycoons were able to create massive wealth through vision, ruthless strategy, and a willingness to play by their own rules. Rockefeller may be gone, but his legacy lives on, both in the companies that grew from Standard Oil and in the lessons he left for anyone looking to build something truly enormous. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie, a man who built his fortune from scratch and became the richest man of his time. Andrew Carnegie was born in 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland. He came from a poor family, and his parents struggled to make ends meet. His mother worked hard sewing shoes, and his father made weaving looms. Andrew didn't get much formal schooling, having only completed 5 years of education, but he had a strong work ethic and a desire to succeed. At just 13 years old, Carnegie started working in a cotton mill for $1.20 a week. He later worked as a messenger boy in Pittsburgh delivering telegrams. It wasn't easy, but Carnegie never gave up. His determination paid off when he became skilled at reading Morse code and caught the attention of Thomas Scott, a manager at the Pennsylvania Railroad. Scott hired Carnegie as his telegrapher and private secretary, paying him $35 a month. While working for Scott, Carnegie learned a lot about business, especially investing. Scott encouraged him to invest in stocks, which gave Carnegie his first taste of wealth building. Over time, Carnegie made smart investments and used his earnings to start the Keystone Bridge Company, which built bridges and owned iron mills. Owning the mills meant that Carnegie didn't have to rely on others for iron, which gave him a big advantage over his competitors. Carnegie's success didn't stop there. He expanded into the railroad industry and eventually created Carnegie Steel, the largest steel company in the United States. He used a strategy called vertical integration, which meant that Carnegie controlled every part of the steelmaking process, from mining the iron to producing the final product. This helped him make steel more efficiently and cheaply than anyone else. In 1901, Carnegie sold his steel company to J.P. Morgan for $480 million, which today would be worth billions. Despite this huge fortune, Carnegie didn't keep all the money for himself. By the time he passed away in 1919, he had donated nearly all of his wealth to charity, leaving only $30 million for himself. His contributions to society were immense. He funded libraries, schools, universities, and scientific research. Carnegie wasn't the only tycoon who made massive wealth from nothing. Others, like John D. Rockefeller and Henry Ford, also started with humble beginnings and became incredibly wealthy. Rockefeller built Standard Oil into a monopoly, and Ford revolutionized the automobile industry with affordable cars for the masses. They each faced challenges, but through hard work, innovation, and a bit of luck, they built fortunes that changed the world. In the 20th century, these self-made millionaires and billionaires proved that anyone, no matter their background, could achieve incredible success. Their stories remind us that with ambition, determination, and smart decisions, it's possible to go from having nothing to building massive wealth. Henry Ford. All companies aim to cut costs and maximize profits, right? That's why they pay their workers as little as they can and try to exploit them as much as possible. You've probably heard this idea before, or maybe even thought it yourself. But what if I told you this isn't entirely true? In fact, companies don't always try to pay their workers as little as possible, and low wages don't always lead to higher profits. We're going to talk about a company that changed how we think about the labor market. This company, out of nowhere, doubled its workers' wages. And to everyone's surprise, this didn't hurt its profits. It actually boosted them. We'll also explore why some companies still choose to pay low wages despite this. Let's go back nearly 120 years to Detroit in 1903. A group of 11 businessmen saw that something big was happening in the tech world. A German guy named Carl Benz had been marketing a type of carriage that didn't need horses, an automobile. This invention was starting to take off in Germany, so these businessmen decided to raise $28,000 to start their own car company. But having money wasn't enough to set up a factory. They needed someone experienced to manage the project. Luckily, one of the businessmen already had the skills and experience. This person was Henry Ford, who had tried and failed before, but this time he was ready to launch a successful car model. We all know Ford today for his work in developing the assembly line, but things weren't always that streamlined in his factory. Before 1908, Ford was more like a collection of independent craftsmen than a factory as we know it. When Ford first started, there were only 450 employees, most of whom were skilled workers following their own methods. This was a bit chaotic, right? But Ford didn't like this system. He thought it was inefficient and wanted to change things. His philosophy was simple: make all the cars the same, identical, like pins in a factory. From 1908 to 1914, Ford restructured the entire factory, and by the end of it, he was producing only one car model, the Ford Model T. This new method allowed Ford to order identical parts over and over, making the process faster and cheaper. Now, Ford didn't need skilled craftsmen to make the parts. He just needed workers to assemble them. And that's when the famous assembly line came into play. By 1913, Ford's workforce grew from 450 to 13,623 people. And get this, 75% of them were unskilled foreign workers. Ford's factory became a well-oiled machine, with employees doing very specific tasks in a sequence. The result? The company went from producing one car every 12 hours to one every 93 minutes. And Ford was making big profits. In 1914, something unexpected happened. Henry Ford announced that starting January 1st, the workers would get a major pay increase, from $2.34 to $5 per day. That's more than doubling their salary. In today's terms, that's like going from $1,800 to almost $3,890. And yes, I know you're thinking, really? Double the salary just like that? It sounds crazy, but this raise cost Ford $10 million, which was about half of what they expected to make that year. So how could Ford's shareholders accept this? Did they just become super generous? Not at all. Ford's profits actually went up. Car production increased by 2,000 units, profits rose by 15%, and worker productivity jumped by 70%. So how could such a steep wage increase actually help the company make more money? Let's break it down. At first glance, it might seem like Ford was short on workers and needed to offer high wages to fill the jobs. But that wasn't the case. In 1914, there was actually a high unemployment rate in Detroit. If Ford had offered just $2 a day, they would have easily filled their positions. So why the raise? Well, Ford had a huge problem with worker turnover. In 1913, over 50,000 workers left the company that year. How could that be possible when there were only 13,000 workers? It turns out workers would quit after just a few months, and often it was because the work was tough and conditions weren't great. The constant turnover was a big problem because it slowed production. Every time a new worker came in, they had to be trained. Sometimes workers would stop showing up without notice, causing delays, and some workers even sabotaged the factory before they left. Ford needed a solution to this, and he found it with the wage increase. By doubling the pay, Ford was able to cut turnover dramatically, from 370% in 1913 to just 16% in 1915. Workers stayed longer, and the company saved money on training and lost productivity. But that's not all. Ford's motivation to improve conditions worked wonders for employee morale. Absenteeism rates dropped, sick leave went down by 90%, and worker satisfaction skyrocketed. This wage increase didn't just benefit the company. It made the workers more committed. Now the big question, why don't all companies follow Ford's lead and pay more to improve productivity? The biggest reason? Not every company can afford to pay high wages. If all companies started offering high pay, the benefits would disappear because workers would just hop from one high-paying job to another. To make Ford's strategy work, it was important that no one else was offering the same wage. Ford's case worked because it was a rapidly growing industry, and Ford had problems with scaling up production. High wages were an effective tool to solve those specific problems. Thanks for watching. What lessons did you learn from these business leaders? Let me know in the comments.